This is a Best in Climate episode of Earth Feels, where each week your hosts Rose and Christine read to you from some of the best climate-related blogs and articles on the web.
Hello, it's Rose here for the Best in Climate. This week's episode is entitled Acedia, the lost name for the emotion we're all feeling right now. And if you listened to our podcast last week, where I asked the question, is climate crisis affecting our mental health? In doing further research, I came across this article written by Jonathan Zecher. He's a research fellow with Australian Catholic University. He'd written this article for theconversation.com, and it really spoke to me. We've had such an amazing response to that last episode that I thought I'd follow up with this one. So again, Acedia, the lost name for the emotion we're all feeling right now. With some communities in rebooted lockdown conditions and movement restricted everywhere else, no one is posting pictures of their sourdough. Zoom cocktail parties have lost their novelty. Netflix can only release so many new series. The news seems worse every day, yet compulsively we scroll through it. We get distracted by social media, yet have a pile of books unread. We keep meaning to go outside, but somehow never find the time. We're bored, listless, afraid, and uncertain. What is this feeling? John Cassian, a monk and theologian, wrote in the early 5th century about an ancient Greek emotion called Acedia. A mind seized by this emotion is, quote, horrified at where he is, disgusted with his room. It does not allow him to stay still in his cell or to devote any effort to reading. He feels such bodily listlessness and yawning hunger, as though he were worn by a long journey or a prolonged fast. Next, he glances about and sighs that no one is coming to see him. Constantly in and out of his cell, he looks at the sun as if it were too slow in setting. This sounds eerily familiar, yet the name that so aptly describes our current state was lost to time and translation. Noonday demon. Etymologically, acedia joins the negative prefix a to the Greek noun seidos, which means care, concern, or grief. It sounds like apathy, but Cassian's description shows that acedia is much more daunting and complex than that. Cassian and other Christians called acedia the noonday demon, and sometimes described it as a train of thought, but they did not think it affected city dwellers or even monks and communities. Rather, acedia arose directly out of the spatial and social constrictions that a solitary monastic life necessitates. These conditions generate a strange combination of listlessness, undirected anxiety, and the inability to concentrate. Together, these make up the paradoxal emotion of acedia. Evagrius of Pontus included acedia among the 8 trains of thought that needed to be overcome by devout Christians. Among these, acedia was considered the most insidious. It attacked only after monks had conquered the sins of gluttony, fornication, avarice, sadness, anger, vainglory, and pride. Cassian, a student of Evagrius, translated the list of sins into Latin. A later 6th century Latin edit gave us the 7 deadly sins. In this list, acedia was subsumed into sloth, a word we now associate with laziness. Acedia appears throughout monastic and other literature of the Middle Ages. It was a key part of the emotional vocabulary of the Byzantine Empire and can be found in all sorts of lists of, quote, passions, unquote, or emotions in medical literature and lexicons, as well as theological treatises and sermons. It first appeared in English in print in 1607 to describe a state of spiritual listlessness, but it's barely used today. making like monks. As clinical psychology has reclassified emotions and mental states, terms like melancholy can sound archaic and moralizing. Emotional expressions, norms, and scripts change over time and vary between cultures. They mark out constellations of bodily sensations, patterns of thought, and perceived social causes or effects. Since these constellations are culturally or socially specific, as societies change, so do the emotions in their repertoire. With the decline of theological moralizing, not to mention monastic influence, acedia has largely disappeared from secular vocabularies. But now the pandemic and government responses to it create social conditions that approximate those of desert monks. No demons, perhaps, but social media offers a barrage of bad or misleading news. Social distancing limits physical contact. Lockdown constricts physical space and movement. Working from home or having lost work entirely both upend routines and habits. In these conditions, perhaps it's time to bring back the term. More than a label. Reviving the language of acedia is important to our experience in two ways. First, it distinguishes the complex of emotions brought on by enforced isolation, constant uncertainty, and the barrage of bad news from clinical terms like depression or anxiety. Saying, "I'm feeling acedia" could legitimize feelings of listlessness and anxiety as valid emotions in our current context without inducing guilt that others have things worse. Second, and more importantly, the feelings associated with physical isolation are exacerbated by emotional isolation. That terrible sense that this thing I feel is mine alone. When an experience can be named, it can be communicated and even shared. Learning to express new or previously unrecognized constellations of feelings, sensations, and thoughts builds an emotional repertoire, which assists in emotional regulation. Naming and expressing experiences allows us to claim some agency in dealing with them. As we, like Cassian's desert monks, struggle through our own long, dark tea time of the soul, we can name this experience, which is now part of our emotional repertoire. So there you have it. How are you feeling this week? Are you feeling listlessness? Are you feeling acedia? More new terminology that we hadn't been exposed to before. Does seem to help to be able to name it. Try it out with your friends and family. See what they think. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time. That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.